Some people didn't come to love you. They came to break the version of you that was never meant to survive what Allah is about to give you. And that pain you keep calling betrayal, it wasn't a betrayal. It was a divine operation to save you from who you were about to become. 1. They weren't sent to stay. They were sent to shake what you hid from yourself. Some people were never meant to stay. They were meant to awaken something in you that was dying quietly while you smiled for the world. They entered your life like a light, unexpected, beautiful, so perfectly timed, it almost felt like a prayer being answered. And maybe it was, but not in the way you thought, because what looked like love was actually a lesson. What felt like destiny was actually disruption, sent directly from Allah. You see, when your soul starts to rot from pain you've buried too long, when your heart has been pretending for years that it's okay, when you've learned how to survive by being silent about what hurt you most, Allah doesn't always heal you with gentleness. He sends someone who looks like comfort, but carries the storm that will break everything you've been faking. They didn't come to be your forever. They came to shake the version of you that would have ruined your forever. Because Allah saw you, smiling while empty, functioning while fractured, worshipping while wounded. He saw you calling it peace when it was really just numbness, calling it love when it was really just fear of being alone, calling it faith when it was just routine. And so you prayed, late at night, in the middle of the noise, or maybe silently, while scrolling through reminders that felt too far from your reality. You whispered, "Ya Allah, make me stronger. Help me become who I'm meant to be. Take away what's not written for me, even if I don't have the strength to walk away." You thought that would bring peace. You thought it would come with ease. But instead, Allah sent them. He sent someone who touched the most hidden part of you. Someone who made you feel seen, maybe for the first time in years. Someone who knew the exact words to say to make you drop your guard, and the exact silence to leave behind that would haunt you for months. They weren't random. They were a mirror, held up by Allah, to show you the exact place inside of you that was still bleeding, even when you thought it had healed. Because heartbreak doesn't come to destroy the strong. It comes to reach the places strength won't admit are still weak. They triggered your deepest insecurities. They reactivated memories you worked so hard to bury. They walked away in a way that made you feel like you were never enough. But really, they left so you could learn. You've always been too much for the wrong person. You didn't just lose them. You lost the illusion. The illusion that love means shrinking. That safety means silence. That your worth depends on someone choosing you. They didn't betray you. They revealed you. And when they left, it hurt like fire. But fire purifies. Fire melts what's fake. Fire leaves behind only what's real. You started crying not just for them, but for the pieces of yourself you gave away so easily. You wept for the moments you abandoned your truth just to keep peace. You grieved the love you poured into someone, hoping they'd heal what only Allah could ever touch. And now, you're sitting in silence, wondering why it had to hurt like this. Why would Allah send someone so perfect for your heart, only to have them break it? But here's the truth. He sent them not to stay, but to be the exact heartbreak that would force you to return to Him. Raw, honest, broken enough to finally be rebuilt the right way. Allah saw what you were becoming. He saw the version of you that was forming from your childhood wounds, your fears, your silent traumas. And He said, "This version can't carry what I've written for them." So He allowed the pain to enter, right where it would hurt most, because only that level of pain could shake you out of the version of you that would have ruined the blessings ahead. This wasn't punishment. This was protection. This wasn't the end of your story. This was the divine interruption that saved you from living a lie too small for your soul. They were never yours. They were never meant to be the destination. They were the detour that took you straight back to your own heart, the heart that was beating quietly under all the noise, and waiting for you to remember that it was created by Allah, not to be broken by people, but to be filled by Him. You thought the pain was proof that something went wrong, but maybe the pain was proof that for the first time in a long time, something finally went right. 2. What felt like betrayal was Allah's way of unmasking the self you built just to be loved. You called it betrayal, but maybe it was just the end of a role you were never meant to keep playing, because somewhere along the way, you built a version of yourself that wasn't real, a version that smiled to be liked, that stayed quiet to avoid being left, that gave too much just to feel wanted, that dimmed its own light just to make someone else comfortable in your presence. You started performing love instead of receiving it, and you didn't even realize it, because the world clapped for it. They praised how kind you were, how giving, how selfless. But deep down, you were starving. Starving for someone to see you really see you without having to shrink to be palatable. So when they came, and they made you feel seen, you thought maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment I can finally stop performing. But the truth is, you hadn't met someone safe. You met someone sent by Allah, to peel away the skin that no longer fit the soul you were meant to grow into. And it had to come through heartbreak, because nothing else would have made you stop pretending. When they left, it didn't just hurt because of who they were. It hurt because of who you had become around them. You gave them a version of yourself that was built entirely to be loved, not respected, not understood, not honored, just kept. You gave pieces you didn't even have to give, and they took it because you offered it so willingly. But deep down, you knew something was wrong. You felt yourself disappearing. You laughed when you were hurting. You forgave when you hadn't even processed. You stayed silent just to keep their presence in your life, because even their presence, cold, inconsistent, confusing, felt better than being alone again. But Allah loved you too much to let you keep hiding in that role. So He let them leave, and He let it hurt, not to punish you, but to finally unmask the identity you created, just to be chosen by someone who wasn't capable of seeing your worth. Because you were never meant to be kept in someone else's pocket. You were meant to rise, to evolve, to love from wholeness, not desperation. But as long as you kept that mask on, the mask that said, "I'm fine as long as you're here," you would have kept building your life around people who only loved the version of you that didn't speak up. So Allah didn't just remove them. He removed you from the role you had imprisoned yourself in. He broke the performance. He shattered the costume. He ended the act. So the real soul He wrote inside you could finally step into the light without needing applause to feel worthy. What felt like betrayal was really your unveiling, and it had to be painful, because the lies you believed about yourself were so tightly stitched into your identity that it took a heartbreak to rip them out. You believed you had to earn love, that you had to do more, be more, prove more. But that person, the one who walked away, they didn't just leave. They exposed all the places you were still trying to be loved through effort instead of truth. And when they stopped choosing you, you were forced to choose yourself. Not the edited version, not the agreeable one, not the people pleaser, but the raw, messy, real version of you, who finally whispered, "Ya Allah, if I have to be alone to become who you created me to be, then let them go." You see, some people enter your life, not to stay, but to show you who you are when your soul is naked, when you stop negotiating your worth, when you let the pain speak instead of silencing it with hope. And in that pain, you finally saw the truth. You saw how much you gave, how little you asked for, how often you stayed in places just because they felt better than the loneliness you feared. But you're not that version anymore. You're not someone who builds themselves around what another person needs. You're not someone who trades their truth for affection. You're becoming the one who doesn't need to be chosen, to know they're already enough, already written, already held by Allah. So no, that wasn't betrayal. That was revelation. And though it tore through your chest, and though it left you gasping for air in sujood, somewhere deep in your soul, you know now, they didn't break you, they freed you from the person you became, just to be loved by someone who never knew how to love you at all. 3. Their exit wasn't rejection, it was a sacred removal of what was blocking who you're becoming. You thought they left because you weren't enough. You replayed it 100 different ways. Maybe if you had said less. Maybe if you had loved them differently. Maybe if you didn't open up so much. They would have stayed. But what if I told you, they didn't leave because of who you are. They left because of who you're becoming. Because what you're growing into can't carry what they would have continued to distract you from. Their absence wasn't rejection. It was sacred removal. You don't see it at first. At first, it just feels like abandonment. You feel small. You feel invisible. You feel like someone looked at all you had to offer and still walked away. But that's the illusion. Because the truth is, they didn't see everything. They only saw the version of you that was still wounded enough to chase closure from someone who was never meant to hold your ending. Allah didn't allow them to stay, because if they did, you would have stayed stuck in that cycle, in that mindset, in that identity that was still begging to be loved by someone whose heart wasn't even open to see you. You weren't rejected. You were rescued. Because love isn't supposed to cost your dignity. And connection isn't supposed to feel like you're always the one proving your worth. And the longer they stayed, the longer you would have kept trying to adjust yourself, your tone, your dreams, your boundaries, just to fit their comfort zone. But what you're walking into now requires a version of you that doesn't shrink. So Allah removed them. Even when you cried, even when you begged him to let it work, even when your whole heart was wrapped around someone who never really saw the entirety of what you carried. Because sometimes the most merciful thing Allah can do is let someone exit, so your becoming can begin. And yes, it hurts. It hurts in places you didn't know could ache, because your attachment was real, because your hope was pure, because you didn't fake your love. But your heartbreak doesn't mean it wasn't real. It means it served its divine purpose. It was the seed of transformation, planted by someone who was only ever meant to be the storm, not the harvest. You were never meant to become who you are, with them still in the picture, because they represented the part of you that still needed external validation, just to feel spiritually secure. And Allah loves you too much to let you stay spiritually insecure. So He allowed them to drift, to disconnect, to change, so you would be forced to return back to the only source that never leaves, never shifts, never breaks, Him. What you're calling rejection was really a course correction, because you were starting to get comfortable in a version of life that would have delayed every blessing meant to arrive through your evolved self, not the one always checking your phone, not the one silencing your needs, not the one craving updates from someone who already emotionally left long before they physically did. You were too loyal to their potential and not yet loyal to your own. And sometimes the only way to remember your value is through the absence of someone you gave everything to, without realizing they were blocking your becoming, blocking your emotional growth, your spiritual clarity, your divine healing, your inner peace. They were the noise in your soul that Allah finally quieted, so you could hear Him again. Their silence gave birth to your voice. Their departure gave you space to rise. Their disconnection gave you permission to finally love yourself in the ways you were loving them. And now, you're learning that closure isn't something they give you. It's something Allah gives you. Through their absence, you thought you lost them, but really, you lost the part of yourself that believed you had to be loved, to be worthy. And now, you're not just healing, you're transforming. Their exit was the opening, the beginning of your arrival to the version of you that Allah was always trying to unveil. So no, this wasn't rejection. This was a mercy in disguise, because what's written for you won't require you to beg, won't confuse you, won't drain your soul. It will fit your heart without forcing it to fold. And when that day comes, when what's written finally meets you, you'll look back and say, Ya Allah, thank you for removing what I thought I couldn't live without, so I could finally become the person I was always meant to be with. For you didn't fall apart. You fell into the version of you that was finally real. You thought you were falling apart. You thought you were collapsing. And maybe you were, but not in the way you feared. You weren't breaking into pieces. You were falling into truth, into a version of yourself that was buried under years of pretending. Because when that heartbreak came, it didn't just hurt your heart. It shattered your identity. The version of you who always held it together. The one who never cried in front of others. The one who kept giving even when it was empty inside. The one who smiled while dying in silence. That version couldn't survive this pain, because this pain wasn't meant for masks. It was meant for your soul. You didn't fall apart. You fell out of the lies, out of the performance, out of the image you built, to feel lovable in a world that only praises strength. And what felt like collapse was actually the birth of your honesty. This pain stripped away the act. It peeled back the layers. It took off the armor. And for the first time, you stood in front of Allah, unfiltered, with no fancy words, no forced gratitude, no rehearsed du'as, just, Ya Allah, I don't even know who I am anymore, but I know I can't go back to who I used to be. That's not breaking, that's becoming. Because real healing doesn't come through being strong. It comes when you're so undone that the only thing left to hold on to is Him. You stopped impressing people. You stopped seeking closure. You stopped asking them to understand you. And in that quiet collapse, you finally started asking yourself what you've been needing all along. You looked in the mirror and didn't recognize who you were. Not because you were gone, but because for the first time, the real you was finally showing up. And they won't understand it. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're distant. They'll say you've gone cold. But they don't know that behind your silence is a heart rebuilding from the ashes of everything you once tolerated. You're not cold. You're clear. Clear about who you are. Clear about what you're no longer willing to shrink for. Clear about what love should feel like. Safe, honest, respectful, not confusing, not draining, not one-sided. And the person they knew, that version of you who over-explained, who stayed too long, who begged for love that barely dripped, that version is gone, because pain took you into a cave. And in that cave, you weren't just healing, you were meeting yourself, without the expectations of anyone else. You sat with your own silence. You faced the ugliest parts of you, the jealousy, the fear, the desperation. And instead of running, you finally said, I see you, I hear you, but I don't need to become you anymore. And in that moment, you didn't just survive heartbreak. You survived yourself. The old self that let people treat you like an option. The self that needed constant reassurance. The one who confused pain with passion, chaos with connection. That self isn't coming with you into the next chapter. Because now, you've tasted something purer, something stronger, something that doesn't leave you questioning your worth at 2 a.m. You've tasted what it means to be alone with Allah and still feel like you have everything. So no, this isn't you falling apart. This is you shedding everything that wasn't rooted in truth. This is you melting down into your core, into your fitra, into the soul that knows Allah is enough, even when everyone else disappears. You are not broken. You are bare. And there's something sacred about that. Because the more you strip away what was never real, the more space you create for the version of you Allah always intended to rise. So let them go. Let the old patterns fall. Let the false strength crumble. It's okay if they don't understand. It's okay if even you don't understand. What matters is this: you're becoming someone. You no longer have to betray to be accepted. And that is worth every tear, every ache, every night you sat on your prayer mat, feeling like Allah was silent, when in reality, He was building you from within. You didn't fall apart. You fell into alignment. You fell into honesty. You fell into divine clarity about who you are and who you never want to be again. That's not weakness. That's a sacred arrival. 5. The pain was measured, not to crush you, but to crack the shell you were dying inside. You think the pain came out of nowhere. You think it hit you like a storm you didn't see coming. But the truth is, it was timed. It was measured. It was written. It didn't come to crush you. It came to crack the shell you were dying inside. You were surviving in that shell, smiling in that shell, posting in that shell, functioning like everything was okay, while your soul whispered, "This isn't it, this isn't me." But you didn't know how to break out, because the shell protected you. It made you acceptable. It kept your wounds hidden. It allowed you to stay in places you had outgrown, until Allah said, "Enough." And so the pain arrived. Not randomly, not recklessly, but with precision. It touched exactly what you were afraid to feel. It reopened the exact place you tried to seal shut. It broke through the exact lie you had convinced yourself was your truth. Because when Allah wants to free you, He doesn't always send relief. Sometimes He sends a heartbreak, sharp enough to slice through everything false. So what's real can finally breathe. You see, your soul was shrinking, slowly, quietly, under the weight of unspoken fears, fake peace, silent compromise, and years of trying to be someone who would never get left. But Allah didn't create you to shrink. He didn't write you into this world just to lose yourself trying to be loved by it. So He sent the pain, not to destroy you, but to dismantle the illusion you were hiding inside of. And yes, it hurt, because the shell had become your identity, the role you played, the voice you used, the way you coped, the people you kept, the prayers you rushed, the boundaries you blurred. The pain had to be deep because the lies had grown deep roots. You didn't just need a reminder, you needed a rupture. You needed a sacred interruption strong enough to stop you mid-performance and force your heart to finally ask, who am I if I stop pretending? That's what this pain is. It's not chaos. It's not abandonment. It's not punishment. It's precision surgery. It's Allah reaching into the places even your own du'as couldn't access. Because some wounds hide too well behind your strength, and some truths can only be birthed through breakdown. So He let the pain cut, right where you were tired, right where you were fake, right where you were quietly praying, Ya Allah, I don't know how to let go of this, but I know it's draining me. And that's the moment the shell cracked. Maybe it looked like a breakup. Maybe it came through betrayal. Maybe it came through loss, or silence, or loneliness that wrapped itself around you like a second skin. Whatever form it came in, know this: it was never meant to kill you. It was meant to wake you. You thought you were strong, but real strength doesn't come from pretending nothing hurts. Real strength comes when you let it all hurt and still whisper, Ya Allah, I trust you more than I trust my fear, because only the soul that has touched rock bottom knows the sweetness of sujud that isn't performed, but poured out. And you've felt that now. You've tasted the kind of prayer that has no words, only tears, and Allah answered those too. That pain you felt, it was custom designed to fit the exact lie you were building your life around. The lie that said you had to be perfect. The lie that said you couldn't ask for more. The lie that said you had to be small to be safe. The lie that said they were the only one who'd ever love you. And one by one, pain burned those lies down, not with fire that destroyed, but with fire that purified. Because what's ahead of you requires a version of you that doesn't beg to be chosen, that doesn't perform to be kept, that doesn't break when others walk away, because it was built in solitude with Allah. So yes, this hurt, but this was mercy, because your heart was too sacred to be buried under who you were pretending to be. And the person watching this now, the one who's been crying in silence, trying to figure out what they did wrong, please listen closely. You didn't do anything wrong. You outgrew your shell, and Allah, in His mercy, refused to let you die inside of it. You thought you were falling apart, but you were finally being allowed to live without the weight of false identities. You were being returned to your fitra, to your rawness, to the you that doesn't need anything but Allah to feel whole again. So let the pain do its work. Let it clean you. Let it soften you. Let it crack you wide open until your sujud feels like home and your heart finally stops shrinking just to be accepted. This isn't the end of you. This is the divine release of the self you never truly were. 6. What you called wrong timing was actually divine timing meant to break you open, not hold you together. You keep calling it wrong timing. You whisper to yourself, if only we had met later. If only we were both more healed. If only life had aligned just a little differently. But what if I told you it wasn't wrong at all? What if it was perfectly written to arrive at the exact moment your soul needed to break? Not to be destroyed, but to be rebuilt? You think timing failed you, but maybe it saved you. Because the person who entered your life when they did, they came when you were still soft in the wrong places and hardened in the ones that needed to be tender. They came while you were still carrying unspoken grief, while you were still attaching your worth to how someone else responds to you, while your heart still equated love with effort that slowly erased you. So Allah allowed it to happen right then, not to tease you with almost, but to touch you at the most fragile point in your timeline, because only in that moment could they awaken something in you that comfort never would. They triggered your soul at the exact frequency where your wounds were hiding. The timing wasn't wrong. It was surgical. You needed to fall for them, not so you could rise together, but so you could finally collapse into yourself, into the truth that you'd been avoiding, the truth that you were still waiting to be chosen, still shaping your identity around someone else's acceptance, still building your self-worth on shaky ground, still believing that love had to hurt to be real. They came when you were still clinging to illusions that Allah was ready to tear away. If you had met later, you wouldn't have fallen for them. You would have seen it clearly. You would have been too healed to be triggered, too whole to be obsessed, too steady to be shaken. But Allah didn't want you to skip the breaking. He wanted you to meet it head-on, because there were parts of your heart that were quietly rotting behind your coping mechanisms, and the only way to reach them was through someone who would touch your soul with both beauty and pain. You didn't need more time. You needed the exact kind of heartbreak they were destined to deliver. They were the alarm, not the destination, the divine catalyst, not the divine companion. They came with the right smile and the wrong soul frequency, because only that specific contradiction would trigger your transformation. And it had to happen then, not after you were stronger, not after you were wiser, but right when you were still tender enough to fall deeply and raw enough to shatter completely. Because what broke you was designed to break the self that would have ruined what's coming. Allah didn't give you a missed blessing. He gave you a controlled demolition, a divine teardown of the structure you were building on foundations He never approved of. You think it could have worked later, but the truth is, it only worked because it came when it did, because it hurt the way it did, because you loved them the way you did, at a time when you were still too hungry to realize what love was supposed to feel like. And now you know. Now you've felt the pain of loving someone while abandoning yourself. Now you've felt the ache of spiritual loneliness, even when someone was physically close. Now you've stood in sujood, with a heart so confused, so cracked open, that your only words were, "Ya Allah, please don't let this be for nothing." And it wasn't. Every heartbreak they gave you was a divine shovel, digging deeper into the real you, not the people pleaser, not the version trying to be perfect, not the one who thought healing meant being chosen, but the one Allah wrote long before you ever loved them. You weren't delayed. You weren't robbed. You were precisely timed to experience the kind of pain that would burn off the parts of you that were keeping you small. So stop calling it bad timing. Stop thinking life messed it up. Nothing in your qadr is random. Nothing is late. Nothing is misplaced. They were sent at that moment because you were ready, even if you didn't know it. Even if you still don't. They arrived when your soul whispered, "Ya Allah, teach me how to love purely, but never lose myself again." And he answered, not with a blessing wrapped in comfort, but with one wrapped in fire. You're not behind. You're not too broken. You're not someone who keeps losing. You're someone who keeps being refined. And this heartbreak wasn't the end. It was the entrance to the part of your story where you finally stop begging time to align and start trusting that Allah never miscalculates the exact moment you need to break, because it's only when your heart breaks open that the real light finally enters. 7. They activated the wound you were afraid to touch so you could finally heal it with Allah. There's a wound you never talked about, not because you weren't aware of it, but because it lived too deep, too buried, too connected to memories you never wanted to revisit. You moved forward. You prayed. You smiled. You helped others. But something inside you never fully closed. A wound you learned to walk around, to live with, to carry like background noise in your soul. And then they came. At first, it felt like peace, like a soft landing, like someone finally understood the part of you were too tired to explain. And you thought, maybe this is healing. But it wasn't healing. Not yet. Because they weren't sent to be your medicine. They were sent to be your mirror, to reach the wound you kept hidden and press their hand right on it. Not gently, not intentionally, but perfectly, so you'd finally stop pretending it wasn't there. They activated the exact pain you thought you buried, the same pattern, the same silence, the same confusion you felt all those years ago with the person who first made you feel unworthy. They didn't cause the wound. They revealed it. You blamed them for reopening it. But how can something be reopened if it was never truly healed? And it had to hurt like that. It had to be them. Because only someone you trusted that deeply, only someone you opened your heart to that fully, could trigger the part of you you've been protecting since childhood. The part that says, I'm not enough unless I earn love. I'll be abandoned if I speak my needs. I have to stay silent to feel safe. They touched that place. The place no one else ever reached. The place even you forgot was still bleeding. And the moment they triggered it, you unraveled. You wept. You broke. You questioned everything. Not just them. You. You asked yourself why you still feel this way. Why you get so attached. Why you care so deeply. Why it feels like rejection is not just an experience, but a spiritual collapse. But you weren't overreacting. You were reawakening. Because Allah, in His mercy, knew that wound couldn't stay hidden forever. It was starting to shape your decisions, your boundaries, your self-worth, your relationship with Him. And He didn't want you to live the rest of your life managing pain that you were meant to heal. So He sent a trigger, a person, a conversation, a moment, an abandonment, a confusing silence, not to destroy you, but to shine divine light on the exact place in you that still believed love meant disappearing. And it's not your fault. That wound wasn't something you asked for. It came from somewhere deep. A betrayal, a parent's absence, a silent trauma A heartbreak you never fully processed. But now, it's no longer in the dark. It's here. It's loud. It's messy. And most of all, it's ready to be held by the one who never leaves. That person wasn't your healing. They were the invitation to finally seek it, because the real healing doesn't come through them. It comes through the nights you collapse into sujood and whisper, Ya Allah, I don't know how to fix this, but I'm tired of carrying it. And in that whisper, you give Allah permission to enter the wound you kept even from yourself. That's when the healing begins. Not when the person comes back. Not when the pain makes sense. Not when you finally move on. It begins when you realize that no human being can ever touch your soul with the kind of mercy Allah has already prepared for it. But He had to show you the wound first. He had to let you feel it. Because you don't ask to heal something you're still pretending doesn't hurt. So He used them, not as your savior, not as your punishment, but as the reflection you needed to finally say, I still haven't dealt with this, but now I will. And in that surrender, you return to your fitra, to your truth, to your original self, the one who never needed to earn love, because it was always written, the one who never had to shrink to be chosen, the one who was always enough because they were already seen by Allah. So no, this wasn't just heartbreak. This wasn't just loss. This wasn't just another lesson in letting go. This was divine exposure, sacred interruption, the end of your emotional numbness. You're not overreacting. You're not weak. You're not broken beyond repair. You're just finally touching the part of you that was never given the space to cry. And now, Allah is giving you that space, through silence, through pain, through nights that feel endless, through moments where you break down in a way only He can understand, because that's who healing is really for. Not the version of you that's strong in public, but the one who whispers through tears in private, Ya Allah, please don't leave me like this. And He won't. He never does. He just needed you to finally stop hiding what you thought was too damaged to heal. 8. You're not waiting for love to return. You're becoming the one who will never lose themselves in love again. You think you're waiting for love to return. You think you're stuck in this space of what if? What if they come back? What if they realize? What if it wasn't over? But what if you're not waiting for them at all? What if you're waiting for you? Because somewhere along the way, in loving them, in giving everything, in hoping they'd stay, you left yourself. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, in pieces. A boundary here, a truth silenced there, a red flag ignored, a need dismissed. You kept loving them harder. Every time you felt yourself fading, you were afraid, not just of losing them, but of who you'd be without that attachment, because you didn't just want love. You needed it to mean something. You needed that relationship to redeem something in you, to finally silence the voices in your mind that whispered, you're too much, you're not enough, you're not worth staying for. But the truth is, you were never meant to be saved by love. You were meant to be reminded by love of who you already are. And now that they're gone, now that the silence feels louder than the connection ever did, you're not actually empty. You're just meeting yourself again, without the distraction of trying to be loved. You're not waiting for their return. You're walking into your own. You're becoming someone who no longer gives so deeply, that you forget to keep anything for yourself. Someone who no longer waits for a message to validate your worth, or a reply to determine your peace, or a presence to prove you're lovable. This heartbreak didn't just end a connection, it ended a pattern of attaching yourself to people whose love required you to disappear, a pattern of performing peace while your soul was screaming behind your smiles, a pattern of being so loyal to someone else's potential that you abandoned your own. But now, the silence is healing you, not because it's easy, but because, for the first time, you're not running from yourself. You're sitting in the ache. You're facing the mirror. You're hearing the whispers of the child in you, who never got to feel safe in their own skin without needing to be enough for someone else. And as painful as it is, this is where you rise, not as someone who finally got them back, but as someone who finally stopped betraying their own heart just to keep someone else's. You're learning how to love without losing yourself, how to stay soft without becoming invisible, how to hold space for someone without shrinking to fit inside their silence. And you're no longer asking for closure, because the version of you who needed it no longer exists. They were beautiful, they were real, they were written into your story, but they were never meant to be the end of it. And now, you're not chasing love anymore. You're becoming it. Love that doesn't beg. Love that doesn't collapse under distance. Love that doesn't dim itself to stay desirable. Love that feels like standing in sujood at 2 a.m. with tears falling and a heart whispering, Ya Allah. This time, I choose you, and I choose myself too. You're no longer afraid of being alone, because your soul has finally tasted what it feels like to be full in Allah's presence. You're not bitter, you're not angry, you're not cold, you're just no longer available for the kind of love that asks you to die inside just to be kept around. You're becoming the kind of soul that makes peace so sacred that anyone who enters your life must rise to meet it, not disrupt it. You're not waiting for love to return, because the next love you meet will never require you to abandon yourself again. And the next time you love, you won't do it to fill a void. You'll do it because you've already filled it with Allah, with silence, with self-respect, with boundaries that honor your heart instead of bending it. You are not broken. You are whole. And this pain, it wasn't proof of loss. It was proof of rebirth. This was never about whether they'd come back. This was always about whether you would. And now you have. You didn't lose. You were never forgotten. You were being rewritten into the kind of heart that could finally receive the love, peace, and qadr that was always yours. Once you stopped chasing what couldn't stay and started trusting the one who never left.